What is happening, motorcycle family? Welcome back. We are here today to talk about a fantastic double header of racing that we had last weekend. Motogp in America and obviously World Superbikes in Portugal after a little bit of a gap for World Superbikes, and well, it was a double header 2 weeks in a row for Motogp, wasn't it? So yeah, the American Grand Prix is taking place and the Portuguese round from World Superbikes is taking place, and we're here to review that with you today. Talk a little bit about what's going on, the updates in the championship and all those things in between, as well as some of the talking points around the manufacturers and maybe some of the things that are shaking out. Now we're into the season with Motogp, there's definitely a few more talking points. We're starting to see patterns emerge and maybe sort of some of the surprises that we thought might have been sort of, due to iffy tracks or maybe people learning things, maybe shaking out a little bit differently. And with World Superbikes, we've got Booliga domination, haven't we? So yeah, I mean, huge weekend of racing in Motogp. Before we talk about any of that, make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you're following. If you're watching the videos and you're not subscribing, please do subscribe. Do the likes and make sure you're putting comments in and asking questions if you'd like to get involved. We're here to hear about what you want us to talk about. So if you want to put things in the comments, if you want to ask us questions that you want us to answer in the videos, we can do. Hope you're looking at all the other content we're doing as well around, the projects that we've got. There's a few too many going on at the moment, but luckily the 848 is done. It's just the GSXR and the XX650 that we're working on. I say we, the old man, as always. So yeah, now that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some racing. I was blown away by Motogp. Insane sprint race on Saturday. Everything that we sort of grew to expect about sprint races when they first came onto the scene a few years ago. A little bit hectic. Everyone was there was a few too many mistakes, and there was crashes when they didn't need to be. Some people up the top of the order where you wouldn't have expected them to be, and people that should have ultimately performed that didn't. And World Superbikes, I hate to say it, I was a World Superbike fan before I was a MotoGP fan. Yes, we always followed 500cc Grand Prix from the days of sort of doing onwards, and the old man and the other family long before that. But my era was, sort of doing onwards. Anything from Rossi and that Nastro Azzurro 500 was sort of my era of MotoGP. But with World Superbikes, we lived and breathed it because people in the family were riding those motorbikes. Back then the racing was insane. There were Brits involved, but there was just great rivalry and competition, and the circuits were insane. All to say, I watched it again this weekend in Portugal, and I said in the preview for World Superbike, we've seen some fantastic racing there, over the years, and you want the track to make the difference and some of the riders to maybe make the difference, but it just flattered to deceive, didn't it? Jesus, like Booliga just running away with it. Yes, he was second in all the races in Portugal last year, so you expected him to do well without Toprak being there, but you hoped maybe someone will be able to give him a little bit of a run for his money, and that just wasn't the case. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to MotoGP, huge weekend. We'll talk a little bit about that first, and then we'll do a little bit of a review on World Superbike, and then we'll talk about some of the main we'll go through some of the main talking points and some of the things that have come out maybe following the racing this weekend. So firstly, I've got to say, massive fan of COTA. I think you get mixed reviews for it, but what we want is unpredictability, as I talked about following the Brazilian Grand Prix the other day, and I think you get that at COTA. We all talk about it like it's nailed on that Mark's going to walk it. And even last year, when he was in great form, he ended up throwing it away in one of the races. We were wondering, now that we'd done Thailand and Brazil, whether or not now, the riders in the Grand Prix class weren't using the different sort of rear tyre that was sort of heat treated. Maybe we'd see the Ducatis come back and sort of catch up, or maybe even overtake the Aprilias. Completely wrong. We'll cover the results in a minute. There's some insane storylines have come out of it, and I think we're learning more and more about what's actually going to happen this season. And blimey, it's difficult to predict, but you're seeing such domination from Bez and Martin, man. Again, when he was in his vein of form before he got injured last year, we all sort of thought, well, this guy could go on and win a few different MotoGP titles if he got the right bike, considering we knew he was joining Aprilia. And now you see him getting fitter and fitter. And yeah, he hasn't quite closed the gap to Bez yet. But, he loves a sprint. He won the sprint this weekend in COTA, looking fantastic. Taking Bagnaia, bless Bagnaia's heart, on that last lap. You really thought Bags was going to have a little bit of a result there, but Martin weren't having it, man, And then in typical Martin fashion, like, bins it doing a wheelie, and I'm surprised he didn't crash. I mean, all I've been saying in all these reviews and previews is you've got to be careful, Jorge. Don't fall off and break yourself and ruin the season. I mean, he literally almost on purpose wheelied, crashed, had to lay it down at 200 kilometers an hour. So what's that? 160, 170 miles an hour, something like that. After he's won, and didn't get injured, thank Christ. Like, touch wood. Let's hope it stays that way. Still no silly season confirmations yet. Some more things have come out, and I'm going to do some separate short videos about some of the silly season rumours, because I think it's time to start, hashing it out, considering they should be confirmed soon. But I'll probably look like an absolute tit when they all come out and they're all completely wrong. But there you go. We'll have to see. I mean, the main story of the weekend is just Aprilia, isn't it? Igura up there again, unlucky with his result in the main race. Jorge Martin and Bez just dominating. Martin winning the sprint race on Saturday, and obviously Bez again on Sunday winning the race. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what that means for these manufacturers and what maybe is going to change, because there's a bit of a gap now between here and the next round, which I believe is Jerez. I don't know what you fucking call it. They all say different things, don't they? In World Superbikes, I sort of alluded to it. I mean, I'm not going to labour the point on it too much today. Really, we hoped that maybe someone will be able to give it a little bit more to Bulega. Last year we saw Bautista and maybe some of the other guys sort of give it a bit of a mix. Bautista was nowhere to be fucking seen this weekend, really. The biggest challenge for Bulega, and it wasn't a fucking challenge, was Miguel Oliveira. He on the BMW, being his home track, was fast, but he still wasn't fast enough to catch Bulega. Despite, looking racy and looking like he might be able to at some points. As I said earlier, Bulega finished second in all three races at Portugal last year behind Toprak. This year, Toprak, no Toprak, and Bulega wins all three races. So, yeah, the question I think we've got to ask is World Superbike no fun without Toprak? I don't know. We need characters in both series, MotoGP and World Superbike. I don't know what World Superbike's got in terms of charisma like that anymore. Maybe I'm being too negative or overly negative, or just harking back to the good old days, when we saw really competitive racing, certainly at Portimao. But does anyone have anything for that V4 Ducati, the factory one? It looks like the only person that might be able to challenge, if he can get his act together, is Bulega's teammate. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, so just briefly to talk results, if we go into MotoGP, so on the sprint race, we saw Jorge Martin win, beating Pecco Bagnaia in the last lap. Bastianini in third, but that doesn't quite tell the story. He gets the podium awarded later on, but Bastianini actually finished fourth if you look at the finish of the race. Pedro Acosta finished third, and unfortunately, after a fantastic ride, which he keeps delivering, he was penalised for tyre pressure. We don't want to see this. We need to get rid of this rule. Everyone agrees, all the riders, all the fans. I'm sure all the bloody officials do as well. It's a load of bollocks. I don't know why we're still doing it. Anyway, here we go. Marquez in fourth, Marini fifth, Agura sixth. So again, what I said earlier, you wouldn't have expected to see some of those names there, but it doesn't tell the story. So many non-finishers that race that were up there. Bezzecchi falling, Gian Antonio. I mean, Christ. What we saw with Mark and Gian Antonio again is crazy this weekend. You've got to go back and watch if you haven't. There is some serious bad blood boiling between those two. We saw an overtake from Gian Antonio early on in the sprint, which was an aggressive overtake, but ultimately Marc Marquez just was not willing to concede, and within the same lap, within a number of corners from memory, he attacked again, beyond his means, was too far back, was never going to make the corner, and ultimately took Gian Antonio out. Which again is just, man, I mean, is it good? It's good for entertainment purposes to watch Mark doing this stuff, but it is not good to see, people like Gian Antonio being penalised for clean, aggressive riding when Mark just needed to hold his form and just maybe wait a little bit and see if he could come back later on in the race. Oh man, it's a tough one to see, but ultimately we're seeing this little rivalry now across a few weekends boil up between Gian Antonio and Marc Marquez as the top Ducati riders. Pecco Bagnaia was seemingly running away with the race at that stage. We didn't obviously know, and we weren't to know until later on that really that wasn't going to be the case, because Martin would come through with late pace and take him. But fantastic race in the end. Really great to see. Really great to see so many names that you wouldn't necessarily see at the front. So Acosta ends up getting 8th after his penalty, but Martin, Bagnaia and Bastianini are on the podium. And then quickly to talk through the results on the main race on Sunday. Basically, we saw the same we have been seeing, didn't we? Bezzecchi just running away with it, literally getting to the front, leading from after the first lap. Jorge Martin coming in second, Pedro Acosta in third and getting that podium this time. Fabio Gianantonio fourth, Marc Marquez fifth, Bastianini sixth in the race. So, Bezzecchi adding to his points tally. I think he's now one of the only riders, one of 2 or 3 riders that's won 5 races in a row, 2 at the end of last season, 3 at the end of this the start of this season. That Aprilia is just looking so fucking strong. The one thing that you need to mention about the main race on Sunday was Ayagura came through with some insane pace. He would have been probably second if not for unfortunately a technical problem that pulled him out. There was still a number of laps left. I don't think he would have had enough time to catch Bez, but he was looking bloody good, and he made such light work of people like Pecco Bagnaia and Gianantonio on that Aprilia. He needs, again, we know what he needs to do to get up there. We need to see him more competitive in qualifying. We need to see him getting better starts so he can be nearer the front for more of the race. At the moment, he's showing his pace and he's almost matching leadership pace, but he's not getting there until later on. So that makes it difficult. With regards to World Superbikes, as I said, Nicolo Bulega wins the sprint and both main races. Iker Lecuona in second in all of those races, and Miguel Oliveira in third in all those races. And that tells the story. And I think afterwards you saw the Lowe's brothers in fourth and fifth in I think all 3 of those races, if not 2 of them. So so championship standings wise in World Superbikes, Nicolo Bulega 124 points to Iker Lecuona 68, Axel Bassani with 60, Miguel Oliveira with 56. And then, if you're talking more about MotoGP, obviously, ultimately, we're seeing Bezzecchi run away with it. And it's hard to argue with what he's doing. He's got 81 points. But Jorge Martin, because of that sprint win, he's on 77 in second. Pedro Acosta with 60 in third. Gianantonio with 50 and Marc Marquez with 45. So that's where we are at the moment in terms of the results. So in terms of MotoGP, let's talk a little bit about the actual manufacturers. Talk a little bit about some of those. Aprilia, what can we say? Insane, just running away with it, looking competitive at every track so far. You've got to fancy they're going to continue this form now. How good can they get? How is Martin going to catch Bez? Is it going to be a battle between Bez and Martin for the championship? Ralph Fernandez didn't really hit it this weekend, but Ayagura, as I've already touched on, was hitting serious pace, and it seems like a matter of time before he'll be challenging at the front. Ducati, Mark, rash decisions. Is he injured? Well, we know he's injured. Is the injury still hampering him badly? We'll maybe talk about that a little bit more. Pecco Bagnaia had a more positive weekend this weekend. Potentially could have won that sprint if it wasn't for Martin. But really, when you drill it down, he is probably 3rd fastest Ducati behind Gianantonio and Marc Marquez. So, what do you do? And for me, Aldeguer is still getting back to fitness. God knows how fast he'll be within a few weeks. Franco Morbidelli, Christ, get your coat, mate. It's done. It is fucking done, isn't it? He's not doing well enough. Other Ducati riders, Alex Marquez, consistent results, but again, he's picking up points and he's doing okay, but he doesn't look like he can match the fastest riders these days. Whether or not when we get back to Europe that will help, and he might be able to make that step from between 5th and 8th, where he is at the moment, quite consistently to maybe that top 4, but I don't know. We'll see. KTM, Pedro Acosta, just the only really shining light. We saw Bastianini have a really good weekend this weekend, but anyone who's watched MotoGP for more than a few years will know this geezer's more hot and cold than your taps on your bath, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's absolutely insane. He can have a fantastic weekend this weekend, be inheriting podiums and be just off the podium in the main race. But then he might have 3-4 weekends now where he might be, not even getting in the top 10. So, I would not want to be one of his engineers. It makes no sense. It seems like he's got pace when he fancies it. If the track suits him and the bike is all in line. Brad Binder, it's not looking great for Brad. I've been witness, and obviously MotoGP fans, if you're watching, I'm sure you've seen. in recent years, he had some unbelievable performances, and for a long time, you thought he was the only one who was going to really bring KTM to the forefront. But he just gets outperformed by Pedro Acosta every time now. His qualifying isn't good enough. You can't rely on that Sunday pace like he maybe did a couple of years ago, because he's not far enough up the grid on qualifying. So he really is just like floundering, and I don't know where he's going to end up next year. I don't know if he's got another year. I don't think he has. I think everyone, apart from a couple on the grid now, are sort of up for next year. So maybe KTM keep him around and maybe he goes to Tech 3. There's other rumours about what's going to happen with Tech 3 at the moment. So, we don't know there. But KTM, obviously Maverick, unfortunately has had to have some more work done on his shoulder. We saw on social media this week that he's had to take a screw out because basically, he just didn't have the strength with the pain he was having in his shoulder to continue. So, yeah, it's a shame. We saw, we talk about the Americans Grand Prix 3 years ago when Maverick was an Aprilia rider. He won that Grand Prix. Again, seemingly out of the blue because he wasn't winning any other races, or he was close to the front in some, but typical Maverick form. But I mean, yeah, hopefully he can come back because he showed some fantastic pace last year, Mav. But I don't see it anytime soon if he's going to have to recover from further surgery now. Honda, oh man, Joan Mir, he shows pace every weekend, but once again, let me bring up the results. I think he was looking to finish strong again, but he ended up crashing, and it's just, now I think it's something like 39 out of his rides at Honda he's crashed out of. I mean, there's only so much you can take as a manufacturer, as a factory rider. You can't just keep throwing it up the road. I think he would have had a really good strong finish in the sprint if he hadn't. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. What do you do with Joan? He shows the pace, but he can't finish races. That is just not acceptable with this level of consistency. Yeah, and then we talk a little bit about the rest of the Hondas. I mean, obviously Marini had a decent weekend this weekend. Moreira, okay, I think he had a DNF as well. Really they are sort of continuing that vein of sort of top 10 form. Joan Mir obviously outperforming the bike's capacity by the looks of it, but then throwing it away. Not an awful lot to say about Honda. Don't seem to be making consistent progress. Yamaha, what do you say? I mean, they are where they are. Fabio's still throwing his toys out of the pram whenever he can. Top Rack did show some decent pace over the weekend at times. I think he finished top Yamaha overall. So, I think there's promise there. But you've got to wonder a little bit with Yamaha if the rest of the riders are just phoning it in a little bit and that's making Top Rack look better. I don't, beyond me to suggest that. They're all professional guys. But, Top Rack is trying to learn on the job and he looks good. So that's the only positive thing I think there. Overall, great weekend, Motogp this weekend. As I say, if I could go to visit, I would love to go and visit that track in Austin. You hear from all the guys they have a great weekend while they're there because right next to the city of Austin. If we can do an MCF trip in future, that will be on the bucket list, believe me. So when it comes to World Superbikes, there's no need to go into too much detail here. Portugal can produce fantastic racing. This last couple of years it hasn't. Well, certainly this year. I went through the results. Ducati dominating. The V4 looking fantastic. People like Sam Lowes and some of the others that are riding satellite bikes looking really good. Oliveira has seemingly found his form on the BMW. Getting those podiums this weekend. But how much of that is because he's so fucking good at Portugal, isn't he? Miguel Oliveira. Might be that. Might be that he's just literally right in there. Because he knows the track so well. It's good to see him up there. Ultimately, he still has to learn the bike, and he seems to have learned the bike in the first couple of weekends. I would have expected Petrucci to maybe do a little bit better. It seems he's taking a little bit longer to learn the bike, but he's such a versatile rider, Petrucci. Think about this man's won MotoGP races. He's raced in America. He's raced the Dakar, and obviously won World Superbike races in the last couple of years as well on his satellite Ducati when he was at Barney. So I think Petrucci will come good. Good to see Oliveira up there. The Bimotors don't seem like they're really going to be able to chuck it to the Ducatis and BMWs. There might be some tracks that suit them. Kawasaki and Yamaha and Honda making up the fucking numbers, man. This is what I mean. It's Johnny Ray was out on the Honda this weekend. I think he's already come out and said, that he wasn't ready to really ride. He wasn't competitive. We'll see Jake Dixon come back at some stage, but God knows when. I think Chantra either finished with a DNF or something on one of the races as well. It's Garrett Gerloff, the solo Kawasaki. Maybe I'm just becoming more biased towards MotoGP. I really want it to be compelling viewing. Love listening to the commentators as well. I think Tozend is a ledge. Obviously such a legendary rider as well for his things, and he's trying to make it exciting. Don't get me wrong, there is always exchanges of position and things, and you see some battles, but for me the foregone conclusion around Buliga is just killing it a little bit, and I think it's just magnified because MotoGP has been unpredictable. Even with Bez, winning all these races, the thing with MotoGP versus World Superbikes at the moment is Bez isn't looking like he's going to win the race on Sunday on Friday, if that makes sense. For those who watch racing, you're practicing qualifying on Friday, then you've got your sprint on Saturday, and Bez isn't looking like he's going to beat, and he's still making mistakes as well. He's falling off in sprints. These are things that make it interesting, even if he is winning, and he's only got 3 or 4 points on Martin. Something serious like developing there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that have come out of it now. I think, one of the, I was talking to the old man about this, and I was saying, what do you think of some of the main talking points? And he said, I think you've got a little bit of a swirl around Ducati at the moment, right? Di Giannantonio seemingly can't keep up with the Aprilias, and he seems to be top Ducati because Mark is mucking about all over the place, and we know Mark is injured. I guess the question is, how injured is Mark? And we talked about this in one of the other videos. Forgive me for labouring the point. The thing is, he's so good at being a little bit of a hiding it. He does not seem happy when you speak to him. He is claiming that he isn't fit, so maybe we'll see him. He's got 2 or 3 weeks now until the next round. He can get the physio in, and he will be stronger. COTA, there's a lot of that switching between directions. With a bad shoulder, that must be hell. I have no idea, but I'm sure it's terrible. But if the bike is 80-90% there, his shoulder is 80-90% there, you'd have thought his talent at COTA, it being an anti-clockwise circuit, would he would be able to make up the difference, but he fucking couldn't. And the other thing with Mark is, I've been talking about, are we seeing this smarter Mark, this wiser Mark that doesn't make rash decisions or make aggressive overtakes when he think, rush blood to the head sort of thing. Last year when he wasn't winning races at the start of the race, he was happy to be patient and wait, and then wear down his opponent and pass them once the tyres had gone down. This weekend, he's just chucking it up the road because he can't wait to get past Di Giannantonio. And this is early on in the race. That's old Mark for me. That's rash decisions, as I say. That's wanting to be aggressive. That's not settling for an overtake. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely fantastic to watch. We all want to see this Mark because it's box office. It makes every race fantastic. But I guess the question is it 6 out of 10? Is it 8 out of 10? How bad his shoulder is? Is it something that's going to be, back to pretty much full fitness once he's back? Or is it one of these injuries that just isn't going to ever get back to full fitness? And if that's the case, considering everything that's happened to this side of his body, can he still win the title? I can't believe I'm asking that at this point in the series. Another friend of the channel, George, asked one of the questions around Aprilia. We've talked a little bit about Aprilia today because of obviously how dominant they're being with Bez and Martin and the other guys making up the numbers. But is the whole package now, is it the real deal? Is that motorcycle going to be competitive at every circuit? Is it faster than the Ducati everywhere now? The commentary over the weekend in MotoGP was very focused around that. The bike seems to turn better. It's more stable. It seems to not be burning the tyre like other bikes on the grid. Yes, you've got to say that Bez and Martin are in fantastic form, as is Ayagura. But is that package now, especially with those riders they've got that have come good, is it where everyone should be looking to go now? Should all those riders that are up in the air maybe be considering that? You're wondering if you're Fabio Quartararo and you turned down that Aprilia ride a few years ago, you're thinking, if you're Aprilia and you've signed Pecco Bagnaia already, and this just isn't confirmed, and again, we'll talk about this on separate videos, but, are you thinking you should have stuck with Martin? I am a huge Jorge Martin fan when he's racing well, when he's fast. I think you give him 2 or 3 more weekends once he's in Europe, and I think his talent will start outshining Bez again. That's my personal opinion. If you look back at the other videos, I was saying, I'm telling you, once he's full fit and he's got more time on that bike, and he's, before this weekend, I wouldn't expected him to win a race. He won the sprint on Saturday. What do you do? It's insane. George also asked around what sort of qualities do we see? I mean, qualifying with Martin isn't there yet. That was obviously one of his strong points. He also is, I think, the all-time leader in terms of sprint wins. Bez seems to be chucking it up the road on Saturdays. He's there or thereabouts in qualifying, but he's not out qualifying Martin. Well, I suppose he has, but I think, Martin, once he's back to full fitness, if he can get qualifying bob on and he can keep winning those sprint races, Bez doesn't have necessarily that in his toolkit. What we have seen this weekend is Bez just seems to be, he had a problem where he lost a wing because there was a collision with Pedro Acosta earlier in the race. From what you hear, from the journalists, from the paddock, from engineers, the difference at the back of what would have made to the back of his bike, considering the aero that was broken, it would have made it quite difficult to understand the bike in braking, and he wouldn't have known the problems there. So he's on the hop, learned what's going wrong with the bike without knowing what the problem is, and he's managed to adapt to it and still win. I don't know if you can speak to that around Martin if he has that. We did see Martin save a front, losing the front, which at some point in the main race. That again is something that you only really are able to do if you're in the groove. So I guess what I'm saying is they're both in the groove, aren't they? They're Martin and Bez are both in that sort of flow state groove, and they're doing so well. I wonder. The other question I was going to ask was around Dijan Antonio and where he's going to finish in the championship. Could he be top Ducati if Marc doesn't recover? I think he can. I think you've got to consider that Ducati will find something over the next few months, hopefully within the next few weeks. And when that happens, are they going to draw level with their Aprilias, or are they going to overtake and find something else, whether it be grip or whether it be something else? They always improve throughout the season. Dijan Antonio, he's riding consistently well. He just needs to take that next step, and I think we've seen him win races before. We've seen him win races versus people on better machinery before. I guess this will be a real strong. This will really show this year what we know about Dijan Antonio and what he deserves when that 2027 sort of rider market opens up. I was going to ask about KTM as well. One of the questions we got was around, how slow is that bike? If Pedro was on the Honda or the Ducati or the Aprilia, how far ahead would he be? Would he just be walking it? I think, considering what we've seen from onboards, from how he's, muscling that KTM around at the moment, I think he would be. And I don't know what that means for KTM. I don't know if they can make enough of a step this year to have an impact with any other rider apart from him. And you think if they can't continue to make some improvements, but Aprilias and Ducatis and Hondas will continue to improve, which it seems like, I think it's going to be a tough one, really. A couple of the other things that came out. Gigi Dall'Igna this week has almost said that America was a bit of a wake-up call for Ducati squad. I don't know what they can do about it. I think they need to, he'll be working incredibly hard in terms of making sure that his engineers and everyone is working overtime to get things to improve. They will not want to be beaten by Aprilia for much longer. But yeah, a little bit more work on the bike, a little bit more work on the overall package, and Marc back to fitness could just be, okay, well, that's that. But we'll have to see. I just really hope we see more Martin and Bez attacking each other, as well as Marc and Dijan Antonio getting in there, some real ding-dong battles. Another thing that came out was around Tech 3. Obviously now owned by Günther Steiner. He's come in from F1 and bought that Tech 3 team. I think that speaks to where he believes Motogp under the Liberty regime will go in the next few years. And the rumour is Tech 3 are going to go to Honda. Now, this might just be a bit of leverage that he's using in the press to maybe get KTM to deliver him some more things. I don't know. Commit to them. Tech 3 to Honda, I can see it. Why not? They're a well-run squad. And we'll have to see what happens. In terms of World Superbike, there is less talking points in my opinion. And again, maybe I'm losing bias on this. Does Bulega have a rival? Lecuona is going to be learning that bike all year, and he's an inexperienced rider in terms of maybe maybe where Bulegar's been. Obviously, they've both had MotoGP time in the MotoGP paddock, I guess, and Lecuona's obviously been in the World Superbike paddock a few years now on that Honda, but Bulegar is just at one, isn't he, with that Ducati always. So we'll have to see. I don't know on that one. I don't personally think Bulegar's going to have a rival this year. I don't think Oliveira or Lecuona can really catch him. And I think Ducati have just got that on song. We really need some of the other manufacturers to come up with some new bikes in the next few years. It'd be great to see a Kawasaki or a Yamaha or a Honda launch something. You know, back in the day when Ducati were dominant throughout the 90s with the 916, 996, and then 998, Honda released the SP1. This, another one in the collection that you'll see at some point in the MCF garage. They designed this motorcycle specifically to challenge Ducati. Ducati had been winning with V twins, and this is a 1000cc V twin, and they took it to purposely beat the Ducati in World Superbike. Really, we need a repeat of that, don't we, Honda? Get your finger out, launch something new. The 4-cylinder Fireblade, maybe that's played out, guys. You know what I mean? Like, we've been banging this drum for a while with the Fireblade, you know. And I know, appreciate, you know, the problem is, you know, it needs to be a motorcycle that sells units on the road. But Ducati have managed to find a formula to do that. They're always releasing, you know, new versions of the Panigale, whether it be a new paint scheme, V4S, V4R, V4RS, V4 up your arse. You know, that's what it is. It's all special different liveries and special different versions with trick kit that are limited edition. Maybe Honda and Yamaha and people like that need to find a way to do that. You know, you can't buy Yamaha R1 now for the road in the UK. You can buy it elsewhere in Europe, as I understand it. But, you know, you have to buy it for the track now because they just weren't selling any units. I don't know what the answer is, but I think maybe it is that some of these other manufacturers need to take a serious look at creating something bred to beat Ducati specifically, and we'll have to see what that is. Hardly a hot take, I know, but there you go. You know, I don't think the Bimotors or the BMW are going to have enough, is the bottom line. So this year it might play out like a bit of a boring one with World Superbike. Who's watching it? You know, they were making a big song and dance about Oliveira having the stands full in Portugal this weekend. Didn't seem that way to me. Maybe I'm seeing the different cameras, I don't know. Anyway, that is your review of MotoGP and World Superbikes. As I said, we're going to be doing some other content, some short content. You'll see continued videos around the XS650 Yamaha. That is ancient, classic, retro that the old man has already restored once and then let it, you know, he and we have let it sort of unfortunately deteriorate over time. So now he has to restore it again, the same thing. I don't know how he's got the patience for this shit, but there you go. That's him. We also have the GSXR 600 project bike for the track. The old man is working on that. So we've seen, I think he's working on the injectors and trying to diagnose why, for fuck's sake, we can't get it to start at the moment. So, you know, that needs new tyres, that needs obviously painting, it needs cleaning up across the board, so there'll be some more content on that. And we're also going to do some short content around the silly season stuff that we're sort of trying to work out what's happening with Honda and KTM and Yamaha and who's going to be that Ducati rider and all those different things. So keep your eyes out for that. Thanks again for your support. Make sure if you've got questions you want us to answer, put them in the comments either on YouTube or go on Motorcycle Family UK on Instagram and follow us there and ask questions there. Share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, please. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Cheers.